Paris, 1789. The July air hung heavy with tension as Charles Louis de Montesquieu made his way through the narrow streets of the Marais district. Twice he had been stopped by revolutionary patrols, his aristocratic bearing drawing suspicious glances despite his deliberately plain attire. Only the Masonic seal he carried, a symbol recognized by key figures in the Revolution, had secured his passage. Now, as the distant sound of mob violence echoed across the city, he slipped through a nondescript door near the Place des Vosges. Rapping 3 times, then twice more, the door opened a crack, revealing a bearded face that studied him intently before asking, "What brings you to our temple?" "The search for that which was lost," Charles Louis replied with a traditional response. The door swung wide, admitting him to a narrow hallway that led to a circular chamber beneath the building. There, by lamplight, 7 men waited around. A table bearing the compass and square insignia of Freemasonry. Brother Montesquieu greeted the eldest, a white-haired man with the intense gaze of a scholar. "You bring news from Rennes?" Charles Louis bowed slightly. "Father Biga has fled the revolution, taking with him the key documents from the church archives. He feared they would be destroyed in the anti-clerical purges." Murmurs passed through the gathered men, all Masons of the highest degree, initiated into secrets beyond those known to the broader brotherhood. "Where has he gone?" asked a younger man with the calloused hands of a working stonemason. "Spain, to the village of Esperanza, just across the Pyrenees." Charles Louis withdrew a folded parchment from inside his coat. Before leaving, he encoded the most critical information into this document and entrusted it to Marie de Neger de Bols, the current vessel of the bloodline. The white-haired leader accepted the parchment with reverent hands. The cipher? Unchanged since the time of Saunière. 3 points form the triangle. 7 seals guard the cup, the others responded in unison. 13 generations from master to apprentice, Charles Louis continued. And the blood reveals all. They finished together. For nearly 5 centuries since the Templar destruction, this knowledge had been preserved within the inner circles of Freemasonry, passed from initiate to initiate in an unbroken chain. What had begun as a desperate improvisation in a Scottish abbey had evolved into a sophisticated network spanning Europe and the New World, preserving esoteric knowledge that predated Christianity itself. "The revolution threatens everything," observed the youngest member, a printer whose press had produced some of the pamphlets that helped ignite the current upheaval. "The church is under attack, the aristocracy being dismantled. Our own brotherhood is split between those who support the revolutionary ideals and those who oppose them, which is precisely why we must ensure the knowledge survives," the white-haired leader replied. "Empires rise and fall, churches wax and wane in power, but the truth and the bloodline must endure." Charles Louis listened as they discussed contingency plans, the creation of additional coded documents, the dispersion of key artifacts to lodges in England and the newly formed United States, the establishment of contact with revolutionary leaders who were also Masonic brothers. "And what of the bloodline families?" he asked when there was a pause in the discussion. "They remain concentrated in the Languedoc, vulnerable to the chaos spreading across France. We have made arrangements," the leader assured him. "Those who can be moved have been relocated to safer regions." Others have been provided with new identities, their connection to the old lineages obscured by altered names and fabricated family histories. The female line remains the key, added a scholarly man who had so far remained silent. Marie D. Negert-Dables has 2 daughters. One has already been settled in northern Spain with a family loyal to our cause. The other remains in Rennes-le-Château under Father Bigou's protection. As the meeting continued into the night, Charles Louis found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here. Born to minor nobility, educated at the finest schools, he had been initiated into Freemasonry as a young man, drawn by its ideals of brotherhood and enlightenment. Only gradually had he been introduced to the inner mysteries, the ancient knowledge preserved from Templar times, the secret of the bloodline, the true quest behind the symbolic search for Hiram's tomb. Now, as revolution engulfed France, threatening to sweep away centuries of tradition and a tide of blood, he understood more deeply than ever the importance of preserving what truly mattered across the tumult of history. The white-haired leader seemed to sense his thoughts. "Do not fear, Brother Montesquieu. This is not the first storm our knowledge has weathered, nor will it be the last. The truth is encoded in stone and blood, in symbol and song. It cannot be erased so long as initiates remain to preserve it." When the meeting finally concluded near dawn, each member departed separately, carrying fragments of information to different destinations across Europe. Charles Louis was entrusted with delivering a sealed message to a Masonic lodge in London, where several artifacts from Rennes-le-Château had already been secretly transported. As he made his way through the awakening streets of Paris, he passed the smoldering remains of the Bastille, torn down just days earlier by the revolutionary mob. A fitting symbol, he thought, the old order crumbling, yet something new already rising from the ruins. Just as the Templar knowledge had survived the order's destruction by transforming into new vessels, so too would it weather this latest upheaval. The symbols would change, the guardians would adapt, but the core truth and the bloodline that carried it would continue its journey through history. Rennes le Château, 1891. The ancient church of St. Mary Magdalene stood in desperate need of repair, its stones crumbling, its wooden beams rotted by centuries of rain and neglect. Berenger Saunier, the newly appointed parish priest, surveyed the dilapidated structure with a mixture of dismay and determination. At 39, Saunier was an unusual cleric, educated, ambitious, and possessed of connections beyond what one might expect for a priest in such a remote village. "Where would you like to begin the renovations, Father?" asked his housekeeper, Marie Dinarnaud, a handsome woman of 30 whose relationship with the priest had already sparked village gossip. "The altar," Saunier replied without hesitation. "Everything begins and ends there." What he did not say, what he could not say, even to Marie, who knew many but not all of his secrets, was that his appointment to this specific parish had been no accident. Certain members of the seminary where he had trained, men connected to esoteric Masonic lodges in Paris and Toulouse, had arranged his assignment to Rennes-le-Château with very specific instructions. The following morning, Saunier began the careful dismantling of the ancient altar, ostensibly to replace its crumbling stone. Working alone, he removed the consecrated slab, then began to probe the structure beneath. On the second day of his methodical exploration, his fingers discovered a loose stone in the pillar supporting the altar table. Heart pounding. He eased the stone free, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside lay several parchment scrolls, sealed, in glass tubes to protect them from moisture, and a small clay jar of obviously ancient origin. At last, he whispered, crossing himself with trembling fingers that night. In the privacy of his modest presbytery, Saunier carefully examined his discoveries. The parchments contained genealogies written in a mixture of Latin and Occitan, tracing certain families from the early Christian era through the medieval period to the present. One name appeared with particular frequency: Plantard, a lineage that had changed spelling several times over the centuries, but maintained an unbroken female line. The second parchment contained what appeared to be coded messages text, arranged in peculiar patterns, with certain letters raised above the line. And the third held a map of the region with specific locations marked by symbols that corresponded to constellations. But it was the clay jar that truly captured Saunier's attention. According to the instructions he had received before coming to Rennes-le-Château, this artifact dated from the time of Christ himself, a relic preserved by Joseph of Arimathea, brought to Gaul by early followers fleeing Roman persecution. Inside the jar was a substance that had long since dried to a dark, crumbling material. Blood, according to the accompanying text. Blood of a sacred lineage preserved through ancient methods known to the Essenes. Over the following weeks, as workers began the visible renovation of the church exterior, Saunier conducted his own secret excavations. Beneath the flagstones of the nave, he discovered a crypt unknown to recent parish records. Within it lay additional relics and documents, some bearing Templar symbols, others with inscriptions in Hebrew and Aramaic. What he found transformed him. The humble parish priest became a man with a mission, and mysteriously, a man with resources far beyond his modest salary. By 1896, Saunier had completely renovated the church, adding curious decorative elements that baffled villagers but would have been instantly recognizable to initiates of certain Masonic lodges. A statue of the demon Asmodeus guarded the entrance. A relief of Mary Magdalene prominently displayed a skull at her feet. And most telling of all, the Latin inscription above the door, Terribilis est, locus est. This place is terrible, a reference to Jacob's ladder and the gateway between worlds, where Saunier obtained the funds for these elaborate renovations, became the subject of intense speculation. Some believed he had discovered treasure. Others whispered of blackmail, suggesting he had found evidence of church secrets and leveraged them for payment. The truth was both simpler and more complex. Certain societies in Paris, Lyon, and even London provided the resources, ensuring that the repository at Rennes-le-Château would be preserved for another generation. On a cool autumn evening in 1897, as Saunier sat in his newly built Villa Bethany, another inexplicably grand project for a humble priest, a visitor arrived. The man, who identified himself only as Thomas, presented a ring bearing a specific arrangement of compass, square, and rose. "You have done well, Father," Thomas said once they were sealed in Saunier's private study. "The renovations proceed according to the ancient plans. The symbols are in place," Saunier confirmed. visible yet invisible, speaking only to those with eyes to see. And the bloodline, secure? The plantered girl married last spring. She bears a child, now a daughter. Saunier poured wine for his guest. She knows nothing of her heritage. Of course, only that certain traditions must be maintained, certain objects passed from mother to daughter. Thomas nodded approvingly. As it has been since the beginning, the female line preserves what male ambition would exploit. As they spoke further, Thomas revealed the broader context of Saunier's work. Similar repositories existed across Europe in Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, in certain churches in northern Spain, in Templar commanderies repurposed as innocent-seeming village churches. Each contained fragments of a greater whole, ensuring that no single discovery could reveal the entire truth. The time approaches when these fragments may need to be united, Thomas said as he prepared to depart. Not in our lifetime, perhaps, but soon enough. The signs align as they have not done since the Templar era. The cipher remains as it was established? Saunier asked. Thomas nodded. 3 points form the triangle. 7 seals guard the cup, Saunier continued. 13 generations from master to apprentice. And the blood reveals all, they finished in unison. After his visitor departed, Saunier stood for a long time at the window of his study, gazing down at the small church he had transformed into a repository of ancient secrets. What strange journey had brought him here, from seminary student to guardian of a truth that predated Christianity itself? He thought of the bloodline, the descendants of a union that the Church had sought to erase from history. He thought of the Templars burned as heretics for protecting this knowledge. And he thought of the generations of guardians who had passed the flame from hand to hand across the centuries, ensuring that the truth would survive until the world was ready to receive it. Outside, the wind whispered through the olive trees, surrounding Villa Bethania, carrying the scent of the ancient land that had harbored these secrets for nearly 2 millennia. In the distance, the peaks of the Pyrenees stood silhouetted against the starlit sky, silent witnesses to the unfolding of a mystery that had shaped the hidden currents of European history. Saunier crossed himself, not with the orthodox gesture of the Roman Church, but with a more ancient sign that would have been recognized by Templar knights and Essene mystics alike. Then he returned to his desk, where the parchments and artifacts from beneath the altar lay spread before him, continuing the work that would occupy the remainder of his life and echo far beyond it into centuries yet to come. Cambridge University. Present-day Professor Elise Dufour squinted at the digital scan displayed on her laboratory monitor, adjusting the contrast to better reveal the faded text beneath centuries of discoloration. The parchment itself remained, sealed in a climate-controlled chamber beside her workstation, too fragile to risk direct handling. "There," she murmured, tapping a section of the screen where a pattern emerged from the seemingly random arrangement of letters. "It's not gibberish." After all, for 6 months, Elise had been analyzing what her colleagues dismissed as a meaningless medieval forgery, a parchment purportedly discovered among the effects of Berenger Saunier, the mysterious priest of Rennes-le-Château, whose sudden wealth in the 1890s had spawned countless theories and conspiracy novels. But Elise saw what others missed. Patterns within patterns, text arranged to form geometric shapes when certain letters were connected. And most intriguingly, A watermark visible only under specific wavelengths of light. A watermark bearing a symbol she had encountered before. In her studies of Templar artifacts, Professor Dufour, a voice interrupted her concentration. I've brought those comparative samples you requested. Alice glanced up to see her research assistant, Thomas Blackwood, a serious young American doctoral student with an uncanny knack for languages. He carried a sealed archival container bearing the insignia of the Bodleian Library. Excellent timing, Thomas. She gestured to the screen. I've just isolated what appears to be a substitution cipher embedded in the text arrangement. Now, we need to determine if it matches other examples from the same period. Thomas set down the container and peered at the monitor. The pattern resembles Templar tomb inscriptions. See how the letters form a Maltese cross when connected? Precisely. Elise leaned back, massaging her temples. 3 days with minimal. Sleep had left her exhausted but too wired to rest. If we can decode this section, it might give us the key to the entire document. As Thomas carefully extracted the comparative samples, 13th century manuscripts with known Templar connections, Elise found herself studying her assistant with renewed curiosity. 6 months earlier, he had appeared in her department with impeccable credentials and a research focus perfectly aligned with her own obscure specialty. Coincidence, perhaps, or something else? I've been meaning to ask, she said casually. What drew you to Templar linguistic patterns? It's hardly a mainstream field. Thomas arranged the samples on the sterile workbench, his movements precise and practiced. For a moment he seemed not to have heard her question, his attention fixed on aligning the fragile documents under the laboratory's specialized lighting. Family history, he finally replied, his voice casual yet somehow measured. My grandfather was obsessed with medieval religious orders. He had a particular fascination with the Templars, claimed our family had some distant connection. A smile briefly crossed his face. You know how Americans are about European ancestry? Elise nodded, not entirely satisfied with the explanation but unwilling to press further. Something in Thomas's manner, a guardedness beneath his scholarly demeanor, had always intrigued her. His knowledge of obscure Templar symbols and ciphers sometimes seemed to transcend academic learning, as though drawn from some more intimate source. This one, Thomas said, redirecting her attention to a parchment fragment from Rosslyn Chapel. The cipher pattern is remarkably similar. See how the letters are subtly raised from the baseline? Elise leaned closer, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. Yes, and the spacing follows the same Fibonacci sequence. She quickly adjusted her digital scan, isolating the raised letters from Saunier's parchment and arranging them in sequence. The result was gibberish, splice espaced anagram, perhaps? Thomas suggested, already jotting the letters on a notepad and beginning to rearrange them, or another layer of encryption. Elise frowned, a memory stirring from her research. Saunier's personal papers mentioned a key of Solomon, a specific arrangement used to decode Templar messages. As she spoke, her fingers flew across the keyboard, applying various decryption algorithms to the sequence. On her 5th attempt, the letters rearranged themselves into a recognizable phrase. Bloodlines preservis. Bloodlines preserve it as ... Elise read aloud, her voice trailing off. That's it? The rest must be on another section of the parchment. Or it's the answer to a question we haven't yet formulated, Thomas suggested, his expression thoughtful. The Templars often used dialogic. Ciphers one document poses a question that only another can answer. A chill ran through Elise despite the laboratory's carefully regulated temperature, like a call and response system. 3 points form the triangle ... single quotes. Thomas's head snapped. Up, his eyes suddenly intense. What did you just say? It's a phrase I came across in Saunier's journals. 3 points form the triangle, supposedly part of a Templar recognition code. She studied his reaction with growing curiosity. Why? Does it mean something to you? For a brief moment, Thomas seemed to debate with himself, conflict visible in his normally composed features. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly, a decision apparently made. 7 seals guard the cup, he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, transforming the sterile laboratory into something else entirely, a space where centuries collapsed, and ancient oaths reasserted their power. How do you know that phrase? Elise whispered. Though they were alone in the lab, the only sounds the soft hum of equipment and the faint ticking of the climate control system. The same way I know that. The next line is 13 generations from master to apprentice. Thomas met her gaze directly. And that the response is, and the blood reveals all. Elise felt the room tilt slightly, her exhaustion and the sudden revelation combining to make her light-headed. You're not just studying the Templars, are you? No more than you are, Professor. Dufour. Thomas's voice had changed, carrying a formal quality she had never heard from him before. Or should I call you by your mother's family name, Plantard? The name hit her like a physical blow. Her mother's lineage was not something she discussed, not something anyone outside her immediate family should have known about. The Plantard connection was deliberately obscured in public records, a precaution her grandmother had insisted upon without ever fully explaining why. Who are you really? She asked, instinctively closing the digital files on her screen. Someone who has been looking for you for a very long time. Thomas, if that was indeed his name, reached into his shirt and withdrew a medallion hanging from a silver chain. The design was instantly familiar to Elise. 2 interlocked triangles forming a 6-pointed star, surrounded by a circle inscribed with ancient Aramaic characters. My grandmother had one just like that, she whispered. I know. Thomas placed the medallion on the table between them. They were crafted as pairs in the 14th century, one for the guardian, one for the vessel. They've been separated for over 100 years, since Saunier's time. The laboratory suddenly seemed very quiet, the outside world remote and unimportant. Elise felt as though she stood at a threshold behind her, the comfortable certainty of academic life. Before her, something vast and unknown that had nevertheless been waiting for her all along. The bloodline, she said, the pieces clicking into place, the Templar secret. It's not just historical research for you, nor is it for you, though you may not have realized it until now. Thomas's expression softened. Your interest in the Templars, your fascination with Saunier, your intuitive understanding of ciphers others dismiss as meaningless. Did you never wonder why these things called to you so strongly? Elise thought of her childhood dreams strange. Visions of ancient Jerusalem, of hidden chambers beneath stone floors, of a wooden cup of simple design that nonetheless radiated importance. dreams her grandmother had listened to with peculiar intensity, nodding as though they confirmed something she had long suspected. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked, though part of her already knew, had perhaps always known. "That you, Elise Dufour, through your mother's mother and back through 13 generations of daughters, carry the bloodline the Templars gave their lives to protect." Thomas spoke with quiet certainty. The bloodline that traces its origins to the very foundations of Christianity and beyond. Outside the laboratory windows, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the Cambridge quadrangle. In that golden hour light, Thomas looked different, somehow not the earnest doctoral student she had worked alongside for months, but something older, a figure stepping out of history itself. "I don't believe in fairy tales," Elise said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Next you'll be talking about the Holy Grail and Mary Magdalene." "Those are just symbols," Thomas replied, "ways of encoding a truth too dangerous to express directly. What matters is the bloodline and the knowledge it preserves." He reached for the archival container he had brought, opening a hidden compartment in its base that Elise had never noticed. From it, he withdrew a sealed glass vial containing what appeared to be dried earth or ash. "This was recovered from the execution site of Jacques de Molay," he said, his voice taking on a reverent quality. "Earth mixed with the blood of the last Grand Master, preserved through 7 centuries by a succession of guardians. And what am I supposed to do with it?" Elise asked, fighting a strange urge to reach for the vial. "Blood calls to blood," Thomas said simply. "When the time is right, when the stars align as they have not done since the Templar era, this will verify the true vessel of the lineage." A knock at the laboratory door shattered the moment. Both of them started, suddenly aware of how strange their conversation would sound to outside ears. "Professor Dufour?" called a voice. "Security says you've been in there past permitted hours. They need to lock up for the night." "Just finishing up," Elise called back, her academic persona slipping back into place with practiced ease. 5 more minutes. When the footsteps receded, she turned back to Thomas, questions crowding her mind. But he was already carefully repacking the comparative samples, his movements efficient and unhurried. "We can't talk further here," he said. "There are others who seek what we've found, people who would go to any lengths to possess or destroy the evidence." "What evidence?" "All we have are fragments of parchment and academic theories." Thomas's expression grew serious. "The parchment is just the beginning, a key to locations across Europe where the physical evidence was hidden. Evidence that could transform our understanding of Christian origins." "And you want me to help you find it?" Elise couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Based on a family name and some coincidental dreams? I want you to consider the possibility that your role in this was determined long before either of us was born." Thomas handed her a business card with only a phone number written on it. "When you're ready to hear more, call this number, day or night." As they left the laboratory, returning to the mundane world of campus security and evening schedules, Elise felt the weight of unasked questions pressing down on her. Her rational mind rebelled against Thomas's implications. Yet something deeper, something that had drawn her to this obscure field in the first place, resonated with his words. That night, in her book-lined university apartment, she opened a carved wooden box that had been her grandmother's. Inside lay family photographs, old letters, and a small velvet pouch she had never paid much attention to. With trembling fingers, she opened the pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. A medallion identical to the one Thomas had shown her. Gleamed in the lamplight 2 interlocked triangles forming a 6-pointed star, surrounded by ancient Aramaic script. "Impossible," she whispered to the empty room. Yet there it was, tangible evidence that at least part of Thomas's story might be true. And if that part was true, Elise reached for her phone, then hesitated. Once she made that call, she sensed that her carefully constructed academic life would never be the same. Was she ready to step through that door, to pursue a mystery that had already consumed countless lives across the centuries? Outside her window, stars wheeled in the clear Cambridge. Night, ancient light completing journeys begun hundreds or thousands of years earlier. Somewhere among them, if Thomas was to be believed, alignments were forming that hadn't been seen since the Templar era celestial, signals that the time for revelation was approaching. The medallion felt warm in her palm, as though responding to her touch. A connection across time, grandmother to mother to daughter, 13 generations of women preserving something precious in their blood. With a deep breath, Elise picked up her phone and dialed the number. Southern France. 3 weeks later, the rental car labored up the winding mountain road, each switchback revealing more of the spectacular Languedoc landscape spread below. Elise gripped the steering wheel tightly, still not entirely certain what had compelled her to follow Thomas's cryptic instructions to this remote corner of France. After her phone call, events had moved with disconcerting speed. A leave of absence from the university, arranged with suspicious ease, funding for extended field research provided by a foundation she had never heard of, and detailed directions to a location near Rennes-le-Château, with a warning to tell no one of her destination. "This is madness," she muttered to herself, not for the first time. "Following a man I barely know on a wild goose chase across Europe." Yet she continued driving, drawn forward by something beyond mere academic curiosity. The medallion from her grandmother's box now hung around her neck, concealed beneath her blouse, but palpably present, a weight that represented both question and answer. As the road crested a final ridge, the village of Rennes-le-Château appeared. In the distance, perched atop its steep hill like something from a medieval illumination. Elise had seen photographs during her research, of course, but nothing had prepared her for the visceral sense of recognition that swept through her at the sight. "I've been here before," she thought, though she knew it was impossible. Following Thomas's instructions, she bypassed the village itself, taking a smaller road that wound through olive groves and abandoned vineyards. After several kilometers, she spotted the marker he had described, a weathered stone carved with a simple rose cross symbol, half hidden among roadside brush. A narrow dirt track led from the stone marker up into a stand of ancient cypress trees. Elise parked the car and continued on foot, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the trees. The air smelled of wild thyme and dry earth, with an underlying mineral tang that spoke of hidden caves and underground streams. The path ended at a small clearing dominated by the ruins of what might once have been a chapel or hermitage. Only partial walls remained, constructed of the same golden stone as the buildings in Rennes-le-Château. Ivy and wild roses had claimed much of the structure, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. "You made it," said a familiar voice. Thomas stepped from the shadows of the ruined wall, dressed now in hiking clothes rather than his Cambridge tweeds. He looked different here, more at ease, more himself somehow. "Did you doubt I would come?" Elise asked, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. Not doubt, hope. He gestured toward the ruins. This was once a Templar outpost, a small commandery, established to watch over certain families in the region. After the purge of 1307, it was abandoned, then later repurposed as a hermitage. By the 18th century, it had been forgotten by all except those who needed to remember. "And you know this, Hal?" Elise couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Thomas smiled slightly. "The same way I knew to look for you in Cambridge. Some knowledge has been preserved outside the bounds of conventional history." He led her through the ruins to a section of wall that appeared more intact than the rest. Kneeling, he brushed away accumulated soil from the base of the wall, revealing a stone carved with a distinctive pattern, 3 interlocking circles arranged to form a triangle. "The symbol appears in Templar sites across Europe," he explained, "always marking a repository of knowledge or a safe house for those connected to the bloodline." From his pocket, he withdrew a small tool that looked like a surveyor's compass. Placing one point at the center of the 3 circles, he extended the other to touch specific points on each circle's circumference. As he did so, Elise heard a faint click from within the wall. "Geometric lock," Thomas explained, pressing against a section of stone that now moved slightly under his hand. Medieval engineering at its finest. The stone panel swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. Thomas produced a powerful flashlight and gestured for Elise to follow him. "You're asking me to enter a hidden tunnel with a man I barely know?" she said, hesitating at the threshold. "I'm asking you to follow the path your ancestors have walked for centuries," he replied. "But the choice must be yours." It has always been a matter of choice. Something in his tone, a respect for her autonomy that contrasted with the near fanatical certainty he had shown about everything else, decided her. Elise ducked her head and stepped into the passage. The air grew cooler as they descended, the flashlight beam revealing rough-hewn steps cut into the living rock. After perhaps 30 feet, the passage leveled out into a small chamber carved from the limestone bedrock. Thomas directed his light toward the center of the room, where a stone altar of simple design stood. "We're beneath the original chapel," he explained, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "This chamber predates the Templars. It may have been an early Christian catacomb, or even a pre-Christian sacred site, later adapted for new purposes." Elise approached the altar, drawn by something she couldn't quite articulate. Its surface was incised with the same 3 interlocking circles they had seen above, but here they were surrounded by Aramaic text, similar to that on her medallion. "What does it say?" she asked, tracing the characters with her fingertip. "The blood remembers what the mind forgets," Thomas translated. "Through the daughter, not the son, flows the lineage of light." He set his flashlight on the altar, its beam directed upward to create ambient illumination in the chamber. From his backpack, he withdrew a small wooden box that Elise recognized. From the Cambridge laboratory, the box containing the vial of earth mixed with Jacques de Malé's blood. "I still don't understand what you expect to happen," she said, watching as he carefully removed the sealed vial. "I don't have expectations, only knowledge passed down through generations of guardians." Thomas held the vial toward her. "This has been preserved since 1314, awaiting the time when the true vessel of the bloodline would be revealed." "And you think that's me, based on a family name and a medallion?" "I think nothing. The blood will know." He gestured toward the altar. "Place your medallion in the central depression. Then we shall see." Feeling slightly foolish yet undeniably curious, Elise removed the medallion from around her neck and set it on the altar stone. The central depression Thomas had indicated was perfectly sized to hold it, as though designed for this specific purpose. "Now what?" she asked, without an answer. Thomas carefully broke the seal on the vial and tipped a small amount of the dark, dried contents onto the medallion. For several seconds nothing happened. Then, slowly, the ancient material began to change, softening, darkening, seeming almost to liquefy as they watched. "Impossible," Elise whispered, her scientific mind rebelling against what her eyes were witnessing. "Blood calls to blood," Thomas said quietly. "After 7 centuries it recognizes its kin." The substance on the medallion had definitely liquefied, now forming a small pool of dark red that gleamed in the flashlight's beam. As they watched, it began to move of its own accord, flowing into the incised patterns of the medallion like a living thing seeking familiar channels. "Touch it," Thomas urged. "Complete the circuit." Elise hesitated, her rational mind screaming warnings even as something deeper, more instinctual, urged her forward. Finally, she extended her finger and touched the liquid that had once been the blood of Jacques de Molay, last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. The sensation was electric, a jolt of connection that flashed up her arm and resonated through her entire body. Images flooded her mind. Jerusalem seen through ancient eyes. A hidden chamber beneath the Temple Mount. Scrolls bearing genealogies that stretched back to the very origins of Christianity. A wooden cup of simple design that glowed within her. Significance, more personal visions followed, her grandmother as a young woman, receiving the medallion in a ceremony conducted in this very chamber. Her mother refusing the burden of knowledge, yet passing the medallion to Elise for safekeeping. And further back, through generations of women who had carried a secret in their blood without fully understanding its significance. When the visions faded, Elise found herself kneeling before the altar, Thomas's hand steady on her shoulder. The medallion had changed, its surface now inlaid with the dried blood in patterns that formed a kind of map. "You saw?" Thomas said. It wasn't a question. "I saw ... Elise struggled to put the experience into words. "Fragments, pieces of a story I don't fully understand." "That is as it should be. The full revelation comes only when all the pieces are united." Thomas gestured toward the medallion. "And now we have the map to find those pieces." Elise lifted the medallion, studying the pattern formed by the dried blood. It depicted not just the region around Rennes-le-Château, but specific sites across southern France, northern Spain, and parts of Italy, a network of locations connected by lines that formed a complex geometric pattern. "The repositories," she murmured, recognition dawning. "Places where the Templars hid their discoveries after the Purge." Thomas nodded. "Divided and dispersed to ensure that no single discovery could reveal the whole truth. The physical evidence, The scrolls, the artifacts from beneath the temple, all scattered across Europe, hidden in plain sight within churches and chapels built by masons who served the inner circle. And we're supposed to find them? Just the two of us. Not just the two of us. Thomas's expression grew more serious. There are others who seek these artifacts, who have sought them for centuries, some to protect, others to destroy. The Church? Elise asked, remembering the subtitle of Saunier's journal. What the Church tried to erase forever. Elements. Within the Church, yes, but also other interests, political, financial, ideological. The truth preserved by the Templars challenges more than just religious doctrine. It threatens power structures that have dominated Western civilization for 2 millennia. Outside the hidden chamber, the day was fading toward evening. Soon they would need to emerge from this underground sanctuary and determine their next steps. Elise felt the weight of decision pressing upon her to continue down this rabbit hole of ancient conspiracies and hidden knowledge, or to return to the comfortable certainties of academic life. Why now, she asked finally. If this secret has been preserved for centuries, why reveal it at this particular moment? Thomas pointed to the ceiling of the chamber, where faint lines had been carved into the rock lines that Elise now recognized as a star chart. The heavens move in great cycles, he explained. Alignments repeat after millennia. The Templars discovered not just evidence of the bloodline, but prophecies concerning when that knowledge should return to the world. He traced a particular configuration in the carved ceiling. That alignment occurs this year for the first time since 1307. So it's all about astronomy, celestial timing? Elise's scientific mind grasped at this tangible explanation. Partly. But it's also about readiness, humanity's capacity to receive truths it has not been prepared for previously. Thomas's gaze was steady. The question is whether you are ready, Elise Dufour. The bloodline has continued through centuries, but in each generation the vessel must choose whether to embrace its heritage or simply pass it on unknowing to the next. Elise looked down at the medallion in her palm, its surface now permanently altered by its interaction with the ancient blood. The rational part of her, the Cambridge professor with a reputation to maintain, urged caution, skepticism, retreat. But another part, awakened by what she had experienced in this chamber, recognized a truth that transcended conventional understanding. If I say yes, she said slowly, where do we begin? Thomas smiled, not in triumph, but with the relief of a guardian whose long vigil might finally be approaching its conclusion. We begin where the Templars themselves began, he replied, with 3 points that form a triangle. As they emerged from the hidden chamber into the gathering dusk, the stars had begun to appear overhead, the same stars that had guided generations of seekers before them. Elise felt a strange sense of homecoming, as though she had been moving toward this moment her entire life without realizing it. The last light of day caught the medallion in her hand, illuminating the blood-inscribed map that would guide their search. Somewhere among the marked locations lay the physical evidence of a truth, long suppressed evidence that could transform understanding of Christianity's origins and the hidden currents of European history. Are you certain you want to pursue this? Thomas asked, giving her one final opportunity to turn back. Once we begin, others will become aware of our search. There will be no returning to your former life. Elise thought of the visions she had experienced, the long chain of women stretching back through centuries, each preserving something precious without fully comprehending its significance. She thought of Jacques de Molay facing the flames rather than betraying his sacred trust. And she thought of the simple wooden cup she had glimpsed in her vision, a cup whose significance lay not in gold or jewels, but in whose lips had touched its rim. "I'm certain," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "The blood remembers, and so must I." As night descended fully over the ancient landscape of the Languedoc, two figures made their way down from the ruined chapel, a guardian and a vessel, continuing a journey that had begun beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem nearly 1,000 years earlier. Above them, stars aligned in patterns unseen since the time of the Templars, silent witnesses to the unfolding of a mystery that had shaped the hidden history of the Western world. The truth preserved in stone and blood, in symbol and song was, stirring from its long slumber. What had been hidden would be revealed. What had been erased would be rewritten. The last Templar bloodline was awakening to its purpose. Rome. 1 month later, Cardinal Vittorio Sebastiani moved with purpose through the restricted archives beneath the Vatican Library, his red cassock a splash of color in the climate-controlled dimness. Few had access to this level of this collection, of documents deemed too sensitive for even most church scholars to examine. "They've been located, Your Eminence," said Father Ignacio, the archivist who had summoned him with urgent discretion. "In the Languedoc, as we feared." The cardinal's lined face betrayed nothing as he reviewed the surveillance. Photographs spread before him, a woman and man examining what appeared to be ancient ruins, the same pair emerging from a church in a remote mountain village. Satellite imagery tracking their movements across southern France. The woman is Dr. Elise Dufour, a medieval historian from Cambridge. Father Ignacio continued. The man has used several identities, but we believe his real name is Thomas Sinclair, a descendant of the Scottish family that built Rosslyn Chapel. Sinclair, the cardinal murmured, the name resonating with historical significance. The bloodline guardians remain true to their task, it seems. There's more, Your Eminence. Father Ignacio hesitated, then produced a final photograph, a telephoto image, capturing Elise holding what appeared to be a medallion inscribed with blood-red patterns. Our sources confirm they've activated the Templar map. They're systematically visiting the repository sites. Cardinal Sebastiani closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the implications. For 7 centuries, the Secretum Officium, a clandestine office within the Vatican known to only a handful of church officials, had monitored for precisely this eventuality. The prophecy had been clear when the stars aligned as they had in the Templar era. A true vessel of the bloodline would emerge to unite the scattered evidence. "How many sites have they visited?" he asked. 3 so far. "We believe they're working their way around the geometric pattern 3 points forming a triangle, then expanding outward to 7 and potentially to 13. The pattern matched ancient warnings preserved in the Secretum's own archives documents. Never digitized, never cataloged in the main Vatican collection, accessible only to those sworn to the office's special oath. And the physical evidence? Have they recovered any artifacts?" Father Ignacio shook his head. "We can't be certain. They've been careful using encrypted communications, changing vehicles, employing counter-surveillance techniques that suggest professional training. The Cardinal nodded thoughtfully. This Sinclair is no amateur. The Guardians prepare for generations for this moment. He moved to a secure cabinet at the rear of the archive room, entering a complex sequence into the electronic lock. The door swung open to reveal not documents, but a single artifact, a weathered wooden box bearing Templar symbols, secured with a lock that had no visible keyhole. "The time has come to activate our own resources," the Cardinal said, lifting the box with reverent hands. "Alert our operatives in France, Spain, and Scotland. Full surveillance but no intervention, not yet. We must understand what they've found before we determine our response. And if they succeed in uniting all the evidence?" Father Ignacio asked, unable to keep concern from his voice. Cardinal Sebastiani's expression remained inscrutable. "Then, the Church faces its greatest challenge since the Reformation. The truth they seek to unveil would not destroy faith, Ignacio, but it would transform how that faith is understood and administered. Power structures millennia in the making would be realigned." As he carried the ancient box from the archive, the Cardinal's thoughts turned to the oath he had taken upon joining the Secretum Officium decades earlier, to preserve the Church, not as an institution of power, but as a vessel of greater truths that the world had not always been ready to receive. Perhaps that time of readiness was approaching. Perhaps the prophecies preserved in these restricted archives spoke not of danger but of necessary transformation. The question that had haunted Guardians on both sides of this ancient secret for centuries remained. Was humanity prepared for a truth that would rewrite the foundations of Western civilization? Only time and the unfolding quest of the bloodline vessel would tell. Montségur, French Pyrenees, same day the ruined fortress of Montségur clung to its mountain top like a defiant fist raised against the sky. Elise paused on the steep path, catching her breath as she gazed up at the stone remains of what had once been the last stronghold of the Cathar heretics. In 1244, 200 Chilthar perfecti chose to burn rather than renounce their beliefs. Thomas said, coming to stand beside her. But before the final assault, 4 of their leaders escaped under cover of darkness, carrying sacred objects down the secret path. Guided by Templars, Elise added, the knowledge surfacing from her research or perhaps from somewhere deeper. The blood memory awakened in the underground chamber a month earlier. Thomas nodded. The Templars and Cathars shared certain understandings, beliefs about the divine feminine, about direct communion with God without church intermediaries, about bloodlines preserved from the earliest days of Christianity. They continued their ascent, the warm spring air carrying the scent of wild thyme and rosemary from the surrounding slopes. Elise had changed during their month of travel, her academic caution giving way to a growing certainty as each site they visited confirmed aspects of the Templar legacy. The medallion around her neck seemed to warm at certain locations, the blood-inscribed map guiding them to hidden chambers and concealed caches across the Languedoc dot at Rennes-le Chateau. They had discovered a hidden crypt beneath Saunier's church, containing encoded parchments that matched fragments in the Cambridge collection. At the remote chapel of St. Jean de Brule, they had found a concealed chamber behind the altar, holding a silver reliquary inscribed with Aramaic text identical to that on Elise's medallion. Most significantly, in the abandoned mines near Bugaak, they had recovered a clay jar of ancient design, sealed with wax bearing the imprint of Joseph of Arimathea's personal mark, the same mark described in Templar documents from the 12th century. "We're forming the pattern," Thomas had explained as they catalogued their discoveries. 3 points create the triangle, the fundamental geometric form that appears throughout Templar symbolism. From there we expand to 7 points forming the Seal of Solomon, and finally to 13 representing the bloodline generations from the time of Christ to the Templar discovery. Now, as they reached the ruins of Montsegur, Elise felt a familiar resonance, a connection to this place that transcended academic knowledge. "It's here," she said with certainty, moving unerringly toward a section of wall that appeared no different from the surrounding stone. Thomas followed without question, having learned to trust her intuition or blood memory, as he called it. Together they examined the wall until Elise located what they sought, a small carving of a rose cross, weathered by centuries but still discernible to those who knew what to look for. Using techniques they had refined at previous sites, they located and activated the hidden mechanism. A section of flooring slid aside, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "4th point of 7, Thomas murmured, switching on his flashlight. "We're creating the Seal of Solomon." The hidden chamber beneath Montsegur was smaller than others they had discovered, but its contents proved more significant. In a small alcove carved from the living rock, they found a leather case containing parchments far older than the fortress itself, documents that appeared to date from the earliest centuries of Christianity. Gnostic texts, Elise breathed, carefully examining the fragile writings. Similar to the Nag Hammadi library, but these contain genealogies not present in any known collection. The parchments detailed bloodlines extending from the time of Christ, with particular emphasis on a lineage passing through female descendants who had fled to southern Gaul during the Roman persecutions. Alongside these genealogies were accounts of Jesus' ministry that differed markedly from the canonical Gospels accounts that emphasized teachings about the divine feminine and the sacred nature of bloodlines. The Templars found similar documents beneath the Temple Mount, Thomas explained as they carefully photographed each page. "What you're holding is likely a copy made during the early Christian period, preserved by communities in Gaul that maintained traditions at odds with the emerging church hierarchy in Rome." As Elise studied the ancient text, fragments of Aramaic among the predominant Greek, she felt a deepening connection to the women named in the genealogies, women whose blood flowed in her veins, whose memories seemed to stir within her own consciousness. "They knew," she said softly. "Even when they didn't fully understand what they carried, some part of them knew its significance." Thomas nodded. "The blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. That's why the female line was crucial, women. Passed down not just genetics, but cellular memory, connections that transcend rational understanding." They carefully resealed the chamber after replacing the parchments in their protective case. Some instinct told them both that these artifacts should remain in their original repositories until all sites had been visited, until the pattern was complete and the full truth could be assembled as they descended from Montsegur in the gathering dusk. Elise's phone chimed with an encrypted message, their prearranged signal from Sophie Navarro. a cryptographer friend who had been analyzing digital copies of their discoveries. "She's found something," Elise reported, scanning the message. A recurring phrase in the Aramaic sections of both the Wren's parchments and these Montsegur documents. Something about the cup that holds not wine but truth. The Grail metaphor, Thomas nodded. Not a physical chalice encrusted with jewels, as medieval romances would have it, but a vessel of a different sort, a bloodline carrying truth through generations. They reached their nondescript rental car, parked on a forestry track away from the main tourist parking. As Thomas stowed their equipment, Elise had the sudden prickling sensation of being watched. She scanned the darkening landscape, seeing nothing obvious yet unable to shake the feeling. "We're not alone," she said quietly, sliding into the passenger seat as Thomas finished loading their equipment. He gave no outward reaction, maintaining the casual movements of a tourist concluding a day's sightseeing, but his eyes flicked briefly to the rearview mirror. "How many? I'm not sure. Just a feeling." Elise kept her voice low as Thomas started the engine. "Something in the trees near the bend in the road." Thomas pulled away unhurriedly, navigating the rugged forestry track with deliberate normalcy. "We've been expecting this. 4 sites. Visited means our pattern is becoming clear to those who know what to look for." As they rounded the bend, the headlights briefly illuminated a dark SUV parked deeper among the trees, its windows tinted, its license plates obscured by mud perhaps. Deliberately. "Vatican security?" Elise asked, her heart rate accelerating despite her attempt to remain calm. "Possibly. Or one of the other interested parties." Thomas maintained a steady speed, neither hurrying nor lingering. "The Secretum Officium isn't the only group that's monitored the Templar legacy through centuries. Who else? Various esoteric societies, some genuine inheritors of fragments of Templar knowledge, others merely pretenders. Certain banking interests with historical connections. T.O. Templar Financial Innovations. Intelligence agencies aware of the geopolitical implications if the evidence were fully assembled." His voice remained calm, matter of fact. "The world is full of players who understand that history is power and that revised history can redistribute that power." The SUV pulled onto the track behind them, maintaining a discreet distance, but definitely following. Elise felt her muscles tense, the exhilaration of discovery giving way to a more primal awareness of danger. "What's our protocol?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "We separate the evidence from ourselves." Thomas took a sharp turn onto a secondary road, the sudden maneuver causing their pursuers to briefly fall behind. "Everything we've documented is already uploaded to secure servers, quantum encrypted, accessible only with keys held by trusted contacts in our network, and the physical artifacts remain in place for now. We've disturbed nothing, removed nothing." He navigated another turn, this one taking them toward the lights of a small town in the valley below. "Our goal has never been possession, only verification and documentation." The SUV maintained its pursuit, neither closing the gap nor falling behind, a silent, patient shadow tracking their progress. As they approached the town, Thomas made an unexpected decision, pulling into the crowded parking lot of a roadside restaurant bustling with locals and tourists. "Public spaces," he explained, cutting the engine. "Multiple witnesses, security cameras. They won't risk direct confrontation here." Inside the restaurant, they ordered a simple meal, positioned at a table that allowed them to observe both the entrance and their vehicle in the parking lot. The SUV had parked at the far end of the lot, its occupants remaining inside. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Thomas said quietly, breaking a piece of bread with deliberate casualness. "The remaining 3 sites in the Seal of Solomon pattern we should visit them in rapid succession before our watchers can organize more effective surveillance." "And then?" Elise asked, her fingers unconsciously touching the medallion beneath her blouse. "After we complete the 7 points," Thomas's eyes met hers, serious and direct. "Then comes the true test. The final revelation requires all 7 keys to be united at the 13th site, the culmination of the pattern begun nearly 1,000 years ago. And you know where this 13th site is? I have theories. The medallion will confirm when all 7 points of the seal are documented." He glanced toward the parking lot, where a figure had finally emerged from the SUV, a tall man in nondescript clothing, his face unremarkable, yet somehow suggesting authority. "But we must assume our communications are compromised. From this point forward, we trust only the blood memory and the physical evidence." They lingered over coffee, waiting until the restaurant grew more crowded with the dinner rush. When they finally left, the man from the SUV had disappeared, though the vehicle remained in the parking lot. "They're coordinating with others," Thomas observed as they drove away, taking a different route from their arrival, establishing a surveillance network rather than direct pursuit. "How do we lose them?" "We don't," he replied, surprising her. "Not completely. But we can control. What they see, create patterns within patterns, just as the Templars did." That night, in a small hotel in Carcassonne, walled medieval city that had once sheltered Cathar refugees, they spread their documentation across the room and reviewed what they had discovered. "The pattern becomes clearer," Elise said, arranging photographs of the artifacts they had documented. "Each site contains fragments that, taken alone, reveal little. But when viewed together, they form a cohesive narrative," Thomas finished. "A history deliberately fragmented and dispersed, to prevent its destruction." The emerging story confirmed much of what Thomas had told her that first day in the Cambridge laboratory, but with details and nuances that transformed abstract theory into historical reality. The Templars had indeed discovered evidence beneath the Temple Mount scrolls and artifacts preserved from the earliest days of Christianity, genealogies documenting a bloodline that traced its origins to the foundations of the faith. But the most significant discovery had been the blood itself preserved. Through ancient Essene methods, sealed in clay vessels by Joseph of Arimathea. Blood that, when subjected to the crude tests available in the 12th century, revealed properties unlike any the Templar scholars had encountered. They didn't have the language of genetics, Thomas explained, but they recognized that this bloodline carried something unique, something that manifested in heightened intuition, in visions, in capacities that seemed to transcend ordinary human limitations. "Are you suggesting something supernatural?" Elise asked, her scientific training still resisting certain implications. "I'm suggesting something that science is only beginning to understand," Thomas replied. "Cellular memory, epigenetic inheritance, the transmission of trauma and experience through generations at a biological level." He gestured toward the medallion she wore. The blood recognizes patterns it has encountered before, resonates with symbols and locations connected to its past. Elise thought of her childhood dreams, her inexplicable recognition of places she had never visited, her intuitive understanding of ciphers others dismissed as meaningless. Were these merely psychological quirks or manifestations of something preserved in her very cells? The remaining sites, she said, refocusing on their immediate challenge. If we're being watched, how do we proceed? Thomas smiled slightly. We employ methods the Templars themselves used when under surveillance by Philip's spies. Diversion, false patterns, and the unexpected use of time. Their plan took shape as the ancient city settled into sleep around them. The stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets now harboring one more. Scottish Highlands. 3 days later, rain lashed against the windows of Rosslyn Chapel as Elise moved through the famous interior, her eyes tracking the intricate carvings that had fascinated visitors for centuries. To casual observers, she appeared to be just another tourist sheltering from the Scottish weather while admiring the chapel's famous stonework. Only she knew that her movements followed a specific pattern, one that corresponded to points on her blood-inscribed medallion. As she completed the circuit, pausing before the famous apprentice pillar with its helical carvings, she felt the now familiar resonance, a warm pulse from the medallion against her skin. 5th point confirmed, she murmured into her phone, ostensibly taking a tourist's photo of the pillar. 5,000 miles away, in a sunlit plaza in Girona, Spain, Thomas received her message and made his own circuit of the cathedral there, completing the 6th point of their pattern simultaneously. Their strategy of separation had confused their watchers, who had split their surveillance resources between 2 targets, moving in seemingly random patterns across Europe. What their observers hadn't realized was that time itself was part of the Templar cipher-specific actions performed at precise intervals, synchronized across distances in a pattern that would have been impossible in the medieval period, but was elegantly simple in the age of digital communication. 6th point aligned, came Thomas's response in her earpiece. 1 remains. The final point in their Seal of Solomon pattern would be the most challenging, a remote monastery in the Italian Alps, accessible only by a treacherous mountain road, and closely monitored by a religious order with ties to the Vatican. They had saved it for last deliberately, knowing that once they visited, their purpose would be unmistakable to those who had preserved their own version of the Templar. Secret through centuries. As Elise exited Rosslyn Chapel, she noticed the now familiar signs of surveillance, a woman too deliberately casual in her observation, a car that had been parked in 3 different locations she had visited that day. The watchers were closing in, recognizing that the pattern was nearly complete. That evening, in her Edinburgh hotel room, she reviewed the documentation from all 6 sites they had visited. Together, the evidence told a remarkable story, not just of a bloodline descending from the foundations of Christianity, but of specific knowledge preserved alongside that bloodline teachings about human potential, about consciousness, about connections between quantum physics and ancient mystical practices. The Templars were centuries ahead of their time, Thomas had explained during one of their encrypted video calls. What they discovered beneath the Temple Mount wasn't just genealogical evidence, but a system of knowledge that integrated science, spirituality, and human development in ways the medieval church could not accommodate. Now, as Elise arranged the photographs and transcriptions, she began to understand why this knowledge had been preserved through such elaborate means across so many centuries. It wasn't merely a historical correction, an alternative version of Christianity's origins. It was a fundamentally different understanding of human potential and cosmic order. Her phone chimed with an encrypted message from Sophie Navarro. Final analysis of the Aramaic passages complete. They describe a vessel of knowing, not an object, but a person carrying ancestral memory in blood and bone. The texts claim this vessel would awaken when stars align as in the beginning, revealing the truth beneath the temple of consciousness. Elise felt a shiver of recognition. The passages could be read as mystical metaphor, or as a remarkably precise description of genetic inheritance and activated cellular memory. Modern epigenetics was only beginning to understand mechanisms that these ancient texts had apparently described 2 millennia ago. A knock at her hotel room door interrupted her thoughts. She froze, not expecting any visitors. Moving silently to the peephole, she saw a middle-aged man in clerical attire, a Roman collar visible beneath his rain jacket. Dr. Dufour, came his voice, accented but clear. I come from Cardinal Sebastiani. We need to talk for your own safety, if nothing else. Elise remained silent, her mind racing. How had they found her so quickly? What did they want? I could have brought others, the man continued, seeming to sense her hesitation. Instead, I come alone, unarmed. The Secretum Officium wishes to propose an accommodation. An accommodation? Elise finally responded, not opening the door. What could the Vatican possibly want to accommodate with me? The truth, Dr. Dufour, the same truth you seek, though perhaps understood differently. There was a pause. The Church has preserved its own version of the Templar discovery. Perhaps it is time for both perspectives to be reconciled. Against her better judgment, curiosity overcoming caution, Elise opened the door a few inches, the security chain still engaged. The man standing in the hallway was exactly as he had appeared through the peephole, a priest of perhaps 60 years, with intelligent eyes and a face that suggested both authority and unexpected kindness. Father Ignacio, he introduced himself. Archivist of the Secretum Officium. May I come in? What I have to share should not be overheard by others. Vatican City, 2 weeks later, Cardinal Vittorio Sebastiani stood before the ancient wooden door, a door that existed on no official map of the Vatican, accessible through a series of passages beneath the Apostolic Library. Only 3 living people possessed keys to this chamber: the Pope himself, the Cardinal Secretary of State, and Sebastiani as head of the Secretum Officium. Today he had brought a 4th. Are you certain of this, Your Eminence? Father Ignacio asked, his voice hushed. In the silent corridor. Once this threshold is crossed, ... The time has come, Sebastiani replied, inserting an ornate key into the ancient lock. The stars have aligned as foretold. The vessel has awakened. We must adapt or risk losing everything our predecessors preserved. The massive door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a circular chamber whose walls were lined with shelves of ancient manuscripts. At the center stood a simple stone altar bearing a wooden box, the same box Sebastiani had removed from the restricted archives weeks earlier. Elise Dufour stood motionless in the doorway. her academic mind struggling to process what lay before her. These were not merely old documents. These were texts that predated the canonical Bible, scrolls that should have crumbled to dust centuries ago, yet remained perfectly preserved in this carefully maintained environment. "The Church's own Templar archive," she whispered. Cardinal Sebastiani nodded. "Established in 1314, immediately following Jacques de Malay's execution. Pope Clement V, despite his public abandonment of the Templars, secretly ordered the preservation of certain materials seized during the purge." "Why?" Elise asked, her voice echoing slightly in the circular space. "If the Church feared this knowledge enough to destroy the Templar order—" "Fear and respect are not mutually exclusive, Dr. Dufour." Sebastiani gestured for her to enter. "The Church is not monolithic, despite appearances. Throughout history, certain individuals within the hierarchy have recognized that some truths must be preserved, even if the world or the institution itself was not yet ready to receive them." Father Ignacio secured the door behind them as Elise moved slowly around the chamber, her fingers hovering near but not touching the precious manuscripts. She recognized Aramaic, Greek, Coptic, and languages she couldn't identify, texts spanning the earliest centuries of Christianity and beyond. "The Templars discovered some of these beneath the Temple Mount," she said. "Not a question, but a statement of recognition." "Yes, documents preserved by Essene communities and early followers who held a broader understanding of Jesus' teachings than what ultimately became church doctrine." The Cardinal spoke matter-of-factly, without defensiveness. "When the Templars were destroyed, many artifacts were lost or scattered, but some were secretly preserved by elements within the Church itself. The Secretum Officium? Our office has had many names through the centuries. Our purpose has remained constant, to preserve knowledge that humanity might someday be ready to integrate." Elise's attention was drawn to the wooden box on the central altar. Unlike the manuscripts that surrounded it, the box bore obvious Templar markings, the distinctive cross, geometric patterns, and encoded symbols she had come to recognize during her research. "You recovered this during the purge," she said. "Not recovered, inherited." Cardinal Sebastiani moved to stand beside the altar. "Jacques de Malay entrusted this to a Dominican confessor hours before his execution, a man who recognized that the Grand Master, whatever his other alleged crimes, was a keeper of genuine spiritual knowledge." "What does it contain?" Elise asked, though something in her blood seemed to already know the answer. "The final key." Sebastiani gazed at her intently. "The location of the 13th site, where all threads converge. But the box can only be opened by one who carries the bloodline and holds all 7 keys of the Seal of Solomon." Elise hesitated, suspicion resurging. "Why would you share this with me?" "The Church has spent centuries suppressing this knowledge." "The Church has spent centuries preserving this knowledge," Sebastiani corrected gently. "Suppressing public awareness?" "Yes, when humanity lacked context to understand it properly. But never destroying. That was never our mandate." "And now?" "Now the stars align as they did in the Templar era. The vessel has awakened." His gaze was direct, penetrating. "And the world itself has changed, Dr. Dufour. Quantum physics explores realities that echo what these ancient texts describe. Epigenetics reveals mechanisms of inheritance that validate concepts of blood memory. Psychology recognizes the transmission of experience across generations. Scientific context for spiritual knowledge, Elise murmured, understanding dawning. Precisely. The reconciliation the secretum has awaited for 7 centuries. Sebastiani gestured toward the box. The time has come to complete what the Templars began, not in opposition to faith, but as its fulfillment. Elise touched the medallion at her throat, its surface warm against her skin. Through Thomas, she had documented 6 of the 7 points in the Seal of Solomon pattern. The 7th had been revealed to her by Father Ignacio in Edinburgh, the Vatican's own repository in the Alpine monastery, which she had been permitted to document under supervision. All 7 keys, united in one vessel, the prophecy fulfilled. "Where is Thomas?" she asked, suddenly aware of his absence from this culminating moment. "Mr. Sinclair continues his work, believing you remain in Scotland," Father Ignacio answered. "For security reasons, we thought it best." "You're using me against him," Elise interrupted, anger flaring. "He spent his life preparing for this moment, as his ancestors did before him." "We are not against Mr. Sinclair," Sebastiani assured her, "but there are others who monitor his movements, factions who would destroy what we all seek to preserve. Your separate paths provide essential security." Elise considered his words, recognizing their strategic logic even as she resented the manipulation. "I'll need to contact him. He deserves to be part of this." "And he will be," the Cardinal promised. "But first we must confirm what lies within." Elise turned her attention back to the Templar box. Its surface bore no visible keyhole, no obvious mechanism, only intricate geometric patterns similar to those on her medallion. "How does it open?" she asked. "Blood calls to blood," Sebastiani replied simply. "The box was sealed with the blood of Jacques de Molay himself. According to our records, it will respond only to one of the same lineage, bearing all 7 keys of the seal." With sudden clarity, Elise understood what was required. She removed the medallion from around her neck, the blood-inscribed map now, complete with all 7 points of the Seal of Solomon pattern, documented and verified. Holding it over the box, she pressed her thumb against its edge until a drop of her own blood welled up and fell upon the Templar emblem carved into the wood. 4. Several heartbeats. Nothing happened. Then, with a faint click that echoed in the silent chamber, geometric sections of the box began to shift and realign, an intricate, mechanical puzzle responding to some quality in her blood that transcended conventional understanding. The lid rose slightly, releasing a breath of air sealed inside for 7 centuries. With trembling hands, Elise lifted the lid completely. Inside lay a single parchment of remarkable preservation, its surface covered with a map unlike any she had seen before. Not a geographical rendering, but a celestial chart marking alignments of stars and planets with a single location indicated. At the center, "Jerusalem," she whispered, recognizing the coordinates despite the ancient notation system. "Where it all began." Cardinal Sebastiani nodded. "Beneath the Temple Mount." "But that's impossible," Father Ignacio interjected. "The Temple Mount is one of the most politically sensitive sites in the world. The dome of the rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque access is strictly controlled. Excavation forbidden." "The Templars found another way in," Elise said, certainty flowing from that place beyond rational knowledge. a passage forgotten since the time of Herod, rediscovered during their occupation of the Al-Aqsa compound. As she studied the parchment more closely, she noticed additional notations around the central location, astronomical calculations indicating a specific date and time when certain celestial bodies would align directly over the site. 3 weeks from now, she calculated, recognizing the astronomical pattern, a configuration that occurs only once every 714 years. The cycle of redemption, Sebastiani murmured, as foretold in the Essene texts. The implication was clear. Whatever lay beneath the Temple Mount, its full significance could only be accessed during this specific alignment, an event they had mere weeks to prepare for, at a site surrounded by religious tensions and security restrictions that made archaeological access nearly impossible. "We need Thomas," Elise said firmly, "and the evidence he's documented. This isn't something any one faction can approach alone, not the Church, not the Guardians, not the Bloodline. The pattern itself demands unity." Cardinal Sebastiani studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is the final wisdom of the Templar legacy, that truth cannot be the province of a single authority, but must be held in dynamic balance between perspectives." As they carefully secured the ancient box and prepared to leave the secret chamber, Elise felt the weight of centuries pressing upon her consciousness. From Jacques de Malay's final defiance to Saunier's quiet guardianship in Rennes-aux-Châteaux, from the Cathar martyrs to the hidden Vatican archivists, all had played their role in preserving fragments of a knowledge that now, perhaps, was ready to be reassembled, not as weapon or political leverage, but as the fulfillment of an ancient trust. Jerusalem. 3 weeks later, the old city lay bathed in moonlight, its ancient stones glowing silver against the dark sky. From their vantage point on the Mount of Olives, Elise, Thomas, and Father Ignacio gazed across the Kidron Valley toward the golden dome of the rock, illuminated by spotlights on the Temple Mount. "Hard to believe we're actually here," Elise said, softly. "After everything, Thomas nodded, his expression a mixture of wonder and apprehension. 7 centuries of guardianship, culminating tonight. The weeks since Elise's experience in the Vatican archive had been a whirlwind of delicate negotiations, scientific analysis of their combined findings, and clandestine preparations for this night. Cardinal Sebastiani had leveraged Vatican diplomatic channels to secure limited access to an archaeological site near the Western Wall, not the Temple Mount itself, which remained politically impossible, but a network of ancient tunnels that might connect to the passage indicated on the Templar map. The Israeli Antiquities Authority believes we're conducting standard documentation of Second Temple period remains, Father Ignacio reminded them. Our true purpose remains known only to those in this group. Their team was small but representative. Elise as vessel of the bloodline, Thomas as inheritor of the guardian tradition, Father Ignacio representing the Secretum Officium, Dr. Sophie Navarro bringing cryptographic expertise, and 2 specialists in ground-penetrating radar and micro-robotics who believed they were simply supporting a routine archaeological survey. As midnight approached, they made their way down from the Mount of Olives and through the quiet streets of the old city to their designated entry point, an unassuming door near the western wall, marked only with the insignia of the Antiquities Authority. The Israeli security officer who met them checked their credentials thoroughly before leading them into the archaeological tunnels that ran alongside the massive Herodian supporting walls of the Temple Mount. "You have until 4 a.m., he informed them in accented English. After that, the regular tours begin preparation. Whatever scanning you need to complete must be finished by then." "Understood," Thomas replied, already unloading their specialized equipment from protective cases. Once the security officer had retreated to his station at the tunnel entrance, Thomas activated a small device that would create electronic interference with any surveillance systems. They had 20 minutes of functional privacy before the disruption would become suspicious. "Quick and precise," he instructed as they assembled the ground-penetrating radar unit. "We're looking for anomalies in this eastern section, according to the Templar coordinates." The team worked with practiced efficiency, scanning the ancient stone wall for signs of hidden passages or chambers. For nearly 15 minutes, they found nothing unusual, just the expected solid limestone blocks laid during Herod's massive expansion of the Temple Mount platform. Then, as Sophie directed the radar toward a section near the floor, the display flickered with an unmistakable anomaly. "There's a void," she reported, adjusting the settings to clarify the image. "A significant space behind this section of wall, and some kind of dot channel or passage leading upward at an angle." Elise moved closer to the wall, her fingers tracing the ancient stones. Unlike the massive Herodian blocks that surrounded it, this section consisted of smaller stones, a repair or modification made at some point after the original construction. "This isn't Herodian work," she murmured. "This section was rebuilt during the Crusader period." "By the Templars themselves," Thomas added, excitement edging his voice. "They found the original passage and sealed it with this false wall, hiding their discovery." Further scanning confirmed that the void extended several meters behind the wall, with the passage continuing upward at an angle that would eventually lead beneath the Temple Mount itself, precisely where the dome of the rock now stood. "We can't break through," Father Ignacio cautioned, glancing toward the tunnel entrance where the security officer occasionally passed. "Any physical disruption would be immediately detected." "We don't need," Sophie replied, already preparing. Their micro-robotic proba, sophisticated device originally designed for exploring archaeological sites too fragile for human entry. "If there's even the smallest gap between these stones, our probe can navigate through and transmit images." From the other side, careful examination revealed a narrow space where centuries of subtle earth movement had created a gap of perhaps 2 centimeters between stones near the floor, enough for their probe to squeeze through. As Sophie prepared the device, Elise felt the medallion growing warm against her skin, responding to their proximity to the Templar discovery. "The alignment peaks in 22 minutes, Thomas said, checking astronomical data on his tablet. "Whatever is on the other side of this wall, its significance culminates when the stars reach the precise configuration indicated on the Templar map." With delicate precision, Sophie guided the probe through the narrow gap, its flexible body designed to navigate tight spaces while transmitting high-definition video and environmental data. On her control tablet, the team watched as the camera penetrated the darkness beyond the false wall. The space revealed was small, perhaps 3 meters square, but what it contained drew a collective gasp from the observers. A stone altar stood In the center of the chamber, its surface bearing inscriptions in Aramaic and Hebrew. Upon it rested a simple wooden cup, unadorned yet perfectly preserved, surrounded by scrolls secured in ancient clay jars, similar to those found at Qumran. But most remarkable was what lay beneath the altar, a channel cut into the bedrock itself, leading to what appeared to be a natural spring emerging from the living stone of Mount Moriah. The foundation stone, Father Ignacio whispered. The Holy of Holies in the original temple stood directly above this spot. Water from the bedrock spring, Thomas added, his voice hushed with awe. According to Essene beliefs, the most sacred. Substance living water from the foundation of creation itself. As the probe continued its exploration, capturing detailed images of the inscriptions and artifacts, Elise felt a strange resonance building within her, as though the blood in her veins recognized this place, remembered it from countless generations before. "The cup," she said softly, "it's not ornate or bejeweled." "Because its significance was never in its material," Thomas finished, "but in whose lips touched its rim, whose hands held it during that final meal. The simple wooden vessel, what? Centuries of quests and legends had transformed into the mythical Holy Grail, sat unassumingly on the stone altar, preserved in the dry, sealed environment of the hidden chamber for 2 millennia. "And the scrolls?" Sophie asked, directing the probe to capture detailed images of the clay jars. "Records of the bloodline," Elise said with certainty that came from beyond conscious knowledge, "and teachings considered too radical for the emerging church, about the divine feminine, about human potential, about the continuation of Jesus' spiritual lineage through physical descendants." As they watched, enraptured by this window into a hidden history, the probe's environmental sensors registered a subtle change, a shift in the electromagnetic field within the chamber as the stars overhead reached their prophesied alignment. On the stone altar, the simple cup began to glow with a soft, pulsing light not supernatural, but a reaction between minerals in the wood and the specific electromagnetic conditions created by the celestial alignment, amplified by the unique properties of the living water flowing beneath. "Quantum coherence," Sophie whispered. "The cup contains trace elements that respond to these specific conditions, creating a measurable field effect." "Science and spirit united," Father Ignacio said, just as Cardinal Sebastiani believed. The phenomenon lasted only minutes, the brief window when the stars aligned as they had not done since the Templar era. As the glow faded, the probe's sensors recorded detailed spectroscopic data, capturing the unique signature of the event for later analysis. When the security officer appeared to inform them their time was nearly up, they retrieved the probe and carefully packed their equipment, leaving the ancient wall exactly as they had found it, the hidden chamber beyond still sealed, still secret, its contents documented but undisturbed. Outside, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky behind the Mount of Olives, the team gathered in the quiet garden of Gethsemane to review what they had discovered. The Templars were right, Thomas said, studying the images and data they had captured. The evidence exists physical, documentable evidence of a bloodline descending from the foundations of Christianity itself, and a body of teachings that complements rather than contradicts the faith, Father Ignacio added. Knowledge that integrates the divine feminine, that recognizes direct communion with God. that sees humanity as vessels of divine potential. Question remains, Elise said, looking up from the images to the faces around her. What do we do with this knowledge? After 7 centuries of secrecy and protection, how is it meant to be shared? It was the fundamental question that had haunted guardians on both sides of the ancient secret, from Jacques de Malle facing the flames to Cardinal Sebastiani in his hidden archive. Would revealing such evidence shatter faith or fulfill it? Would it reconcile science and spirituality, or simply become another weapon in ideological wars? Perhaps, Sophie suggested, that's why the bloodline was preserved alongside the physical evidence, not just as genetic confirmation, but as living wisdom that could discern the right timing, the right approach. All eyes turned to Elise last, vessel of a lineage that had flowed unbroken through 13 generations of daughters since the time of Christ. The blood that had recognized ancient patterns, that had responded to the Templar cipher, that carried cellular memory beyond rational understanding. Not everything is meant for public consumption, she said slowly, the wisdom seeming to rise from that place beyond conscious thought. But neither should truth remain forever hidden. In the quiet garden where, according to tradition, Jesus had prayed before his arrest, the small group made their decision, a middle path that honored both preservation and revelation, secrecy and transparency. The scientific data would be published through conventional academic channels, the electromagnetic properties of the cup, the spectroscopic analysis of the living water, the linguistic patterns in the visible inscriptions. A contribution to human knowledge that required no leap of faith to accept. The scrolls would be partially referenced, their existence documented without revealing their complete contents, an academic mystery that would inspire new generations of scholars to look beyond conventional understanding of early Christianity, and the bloodline would remain protected yet accessible, its genetic markers identified for medical research into inherited memory and intuition, while the identities of living descendants would continue to be shielded from public attention. Not revelation, but integration, Thomas summarized. Not destruction of faith, but expansion of understanding. As the sun rose fully over Jerusalem, bathing the ancient city in golden light, Elise felt a profound sense of completion, not just of their immediate quest, but of a journey that had spanned centuries and cost countless lives to preserve. The last Templar bloodline had fulfilled its purpose, not by overturning established beliefs or claiming special authority, but by serving as a living bridge between past and future, between spirit and science, between what had been hidden and what was now ready to emerge. In the months and years that followed, their work would generate quiet ripples through academic, religious, and scientific communities. Not a revolution, but an evolution in understanding. Quantum physicists would find new directions for research into consciousness and material reality. Religious scholars would discover fresh contexts for ancient texts. Medical researchers would advance understanding of cellular memory and inherited trauma. And in a small village in southern France, life would continue much as it had for centuries. The Church of St. Mary Magdalene, standing watch over a community that carried ancient heritage in its blood without fully comprehending its significance. Children would still occasionally dream of Jerusalem and hidden chambers. Women would still pass down curious traditions from mother to daughter, and the land itself would still harbor secrets in its stones and soil. the truth preserved in blood. And stone, in symbol and song, had neither triumphed completely nor remained entirely hidden. Like all profound mysteries, it continued to unfold according to its own organic timing, revealing itself to those prepared to receive it while remaining encrypted to those who sought it for the wrong reasons. 3 points form the triangle. Elise whispered to herself as she stood alone on the Mount of Olives one final time, gazing across at the golden dome that marked the site of the temple. 7 seals guard the cup, came Thomas's voice as he joined her at the viewpoint. 13 generations from master to apprentice, Father Ignacio added, completing their circle. And the blood reveals all, they finished together, not as a secret code now, but as a simple acknowledgement of a journey completed and a new one just beginning. Behind them, Jerusalem awakened to another day, its ancient stones bearing witness to yet another layer of history added to the countless strata that formed its foundation. The city that had seen empires rise and fall, faiths emerge and transform, secrets buried and unearthed, continued its eternal vigilance, keeper of mysteries that transcended any single understanding. And somewhere beneath its sacred ground, in a chamber still sealed after 2 millennia, a simple wooden cup rested on its stone altar, neither magical chalice nor mere artifact, but something more profound, a tangible link between heaven and earth, between divine and human, between what is lost and what in time might be found again.